All right, so this is not a talk about scaling your application to 1 billion whatever users. This is a talk about how to get from point A to point B in a very small project, how to build something very quickly. Often, when I go to make a new project, what would happen before I worked on this would be I'd start it up, I'd spend 2 months tinkering with microservices or serverless or whatever goddamn new thing is, and I'd get stuck, I'd get trapped inside of it, and I wouldn't build anything. Oh, click to record, got it. Okay, so I like to provide alternative titles for my talks. Alternative title 1, I had 99 projects, but none of them did anything. Why is everyone making shit so fucking complicated? And call me a hipster, but I like my architectures to be from the 1990s. So what I'm getting at with all that is what I want personally when I'm starting a project is to just be able to hit the ground running, and I don't want to spend 2 months just figuring out how to build the thing. So a little bit about me. My name is Parris. I'm the director of web at a company called Brigade. We're in civic tech, so we help you find out what your representatives are doing and help you make sure that they're doing the things you want them to do. Other fun stuff, like I said, web developer. I play music. I'll kick your butt at Hearthstone. Let me know if you want to get your butt kicked. Okay, so one more caveat with this presentation and with Fervor, which is this framework I worked on I've been tinkering with for like the past year. You're not going to see anything particularly new and fancy here. What Fervor is all about is trying to take the best of Node, the greatest hits, pull them all together, and provide a simple interface to make an app very quickly. We take a little bit of the magic behind Next or Create React app, sprinkle in that same config-free, config-light sort of magic. We throw in some auto-generated APIs. We give you a platform for migrations. We do all this stuff so you don't need to think about it. You don't need to juggle 70 dependencies. Yeah. Also, you don't need to spend 2 to 3 months doing that yourself. So without further ado, I'm just going to go straight into a demo. All right, so you see that? All right, so I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to just explore this project for a second. All right, so when you create a Fervor project, all you really need to do is say Fervor create XYZ, whatever you want your project name to be. It connects to a Postgres database. We only support Postgres right now. Bigger? All right. Let me try that one time. Cool. What you get is a .env file. You get a way to handle environment variables. You get some linting. You don't have to configure that yourself. You get a way to actually share an assets folder and have a public folder, because I don't know if any of you have spent maybe half a day or a day just figuring out how Express handles static assets. We have and then where most of this magic is in this source folder. So we have an apps folder, components, config, graph, migrations, and URLs. So there's a bunch of magic here, and I'll go through each one of them. But the high level is apps and components are for your front-end views. Config is for your config and anything you want to override. This includes like Babel and Webpack configs. And then migrations and graph are how you define your APIs and data models and schemas. And URLs is how you route. And it also does some magic around code splitting and server-side rendering and all that kind of stuff. So I have a project started up here. Can you all see that? Is that OK? Sure. It's already started up. So I'm going to go to localhost 3000 here. It's a really simple, like, really basic material UI sort of template that I've kind of set up with this project. Nothing super fancy right now. What we want to do in the next probably 10 minutes is create a migration, which will auto-generate some APIs for you. We're going to create a simple form that will let you create a to-do item, and then we're going to list stuff. And I'm going to try to do this as fast and succinctly as possible without messing up. All right, so what we'll do right now is I'll type Fervor, migrate, make, and I'll call it to do. What this did was it pulled in connects.js, and it created a migration. And at this point, I'll open this up. We have a blank migration here. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly create a new table. T.increments, so you can have like an auto-incrementing table. You can create a string column in that table called name, and you can have some timestamps. Why not? And then when you're done with it, you can just say, I'm going to kill it. So up, if any of you have used connects.js, up means I want to create a migration, and this is the path upward. This is what you're going to do with the table. And down means when I roll back, this is how you roll back. So all you need to do there is schema.drop table to do. And that's it. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll just run the migration. Once again, this uses connects. And that's it. OK, so if we check data grip, and we refresh this, we have some tables and a to-do. Pretty easy. ID, name, created at, updated at. All right, let's take a look at something else. Once you create a migration, and once you run that migration, it automatically creates APIs for you. So we're using something called Postgres under the hood, and it reflects your schema from your database and automatically generates the APIs. So if we take a look at Graph QL, all of a sudden we have all these mutations that are created for you. So you can now create a to-do, you can update a to-do, update a to-do by ID. Any primary keys automatically get update by ID or update by email or so on and so forth. If we run this query right now, we get no to-dos back because we haven't created any. And yeah, we're off and running. So next step, why don't we create an app? So what we want to do now is create a form. I'll copy this just to move a little bit faster. I'll pull the form component, which has some magic that we've incorporated. So this form component is special because it effectively lets you treat every form like a form from the 1990s. And if JavaScript is off, it'll still work. So it just posts to the back end without doing AJAX. If JavaScript is on, it'll actually use AJAX instead. So what we'll do here is we'll define the mutation. And we can define a redirect. Can you guys see that? I'll blow it up a little bit. So we can say we want to redirect back to the home page because that's where our to-dos are going to be listed. I'm going to create a form here. And we're going to create an input. I'll come back to that real quick. So a mutation here, how many people here use Graph QL or have heard of it? Or, all right, cool. So this isn't totally new. So what we're going to do here is just define a Graph QL mutation. A lot of this is coming from Apollo under the hood. So what this mutation looks like is that. I'm going to name it create to do. It's going to have a variable passed in called input. And then it's going to accept a type called create to do. After that, I'm going to say I'm going to fire the create to do mutation, input, and it accepts the input variable. And I'm going to expect back a to do, an ID, and a name. Cool. Now all I do now is pass mutation into here, And then I can treat the rest of this like a normal form input. So type text name equals input. And since this type accepts a to-do item with a name, that's all we have to do to get it to accept that. And then finally, we just create a button. All right, that's pretty much it. That's it. We got a form, and it's going to do some stuff. All right, so one more thing we have to do to get this thing to work is create a URL for it, much like you would in like Django or Rails, something like that. We'll say it's at create, and we'll call it create. So what this file does is on the server side, this loads normally. And on the client side, it lazy loads every URL here. And it will also help you with some hot reloading. But yeah, this file is really helpful for us behind the scenes in Fervor to help you code split and do all sorts of stuff like that. Other cool things that some competitors might not have is you can actually pass an ID here. Ripping on Next.js a little bit, but cool. So that should be it. When we go back to this demo, we hit the plus symbol, and we get an internal server because it's a demo, and that's great. What's going on? Oh. Name conflict? Maybe? Yeah, all right. I'm going to say hello world, hit go. It redirected us back to the home page. And I'm going to check data grip just to make sure the data is in there. The data is indeed in there. And then I'll do one last thing, which is I'm going to make the home page render the to-dos. So I'm going to take this query. I'm going to fast forward past this part. Oh, man, my stash of copy-paste history disappeared when I restarted my computer. Biggest bummer. All right. I'm going to do this super quick. All right, so I'm going to create a query. I'm going to use the GQL tag. I'm going to say it's a query, all to-dos, nodes, ID, name. I'm going to then, in here, say I want the query to be my query. I'm going to set the fetch policy because I don't want to handle any sort of optimistic rendering here to network only. And then I'm going to render the data. So I'll just say UL, create some simple list items, all to-dos. And if you notice, this matches back up with this format. And so we could just say all to-dos, nodes, and we're going to map it to some nodes. All right. Did I break anything? Oh, well, yeah. All right, so let's see if that panned out. Cool, we have our to-do item. So let's just test this out a little bit. Yo. So, cool, and that's it. That's how to do something really simple in this mini framework we've built here. But how about some more complicated stuff? The first question everyone probably has on their mind, how about permissions? How about auth? How about all the common stuff you got to do to actually make an application work? Well, I have an answer for you. So PostGraphile, the reason Postgres is used here and PostGraphile is a thing is because Postgres introduced a feature called row-level permissions. And with row-level permissions, what you can do is, in a declarative fashion, say, this row cannot be returned unless some condition is met. And so via your migrations, you can say, don't give this row to so-and-so without either this role or this check. So in this example here, I know it's a bit small, we're basically saying on the pages table, admins can do whatever they want. So we both have roles and we have other row level checks. So admins can do whatever they want. They can create new pages, they can delete pages, they can insert pages. Let me use a word other than pages. They can insert to-do items, they can create to-do items, they can do all that. And then we're saying contributors or members, people that are logged in. Those people can do things only if they have a check, and the check is if person ID equals current settings JWT claims person ID. What the hell is that? OK, so what we do between Fervor, PostGraphile, and Postgres is we pass a JSON web token from a cookie all the way to Postgres, and Postgres knows about the session data. And so all of a sudden, any request that happens does this check against that. And then lastly, we can say anonymous people can read this table, and that's all good. Next topic that might be kind of tricky, auth. So we have two flavors of auth. One of them is you can create a function in Postgres. This one's nasty. I don't like it. You can create a function in Postgres, and we can expose that out to our Graph database, or sorry, our Graph API. The second way is you can say a table is admin only, and then when your Graph API makes when you get an incoming request from your Graph API, you can create a custom resolver that handles that. And you have the JSON web token behind the scenes that lets you handle making requests to that table. So you stuff a JSON web token for admin privileges in your environment variables, and then you can just make whatever requests you want. And the only other complexity that needs to get solved here, at least for our use case, is what happens with local state. What happens with state on your client side application? And we have three options. We do have Redux built in. But lately, I've just been using some React state. But I think the thing that's ultimately going to win is Apollo has built one of the new features in Apollo, which is a Graph QL client, is that you can define a schema on the client side. And so as you're requesting server-side data, you can also request your local state. I think that's eventually going to win. So am I using this in production? And the answer is yes. I got a tiny application I'd like to plug called StoryForge. Basically, this is a UI editor for what we're going to call stories. Stories are the same as like AMP stories, if you've kind of heard of those. They're kind of similar to that, except you don't have to use AMP's crappy UI. So you can kind of construct nice UIs with this, and we have all sorts of effects, and you can use video and actual pictures, because I don't know what's up with AMP. But yeah, so check this out if you want to play around with a production app that actually uses this. So, OK, why did I do any of this? Why don't I just use all these off-the-shelf things? Why don't I just like plug a bunch of shit into Ruby on Rails and like call it a day? Well, I'm not going to go into that. Otherwise, you'd hear another 30-minute rant. But what I'll do is I'll mention three quotes that have been rattling around my head. One, there's a quote that's now known as Conway's law. And this quote goes something like, organizations that design systems will produce systems based on their communication structure. So if you have a bunch of teams that are product focused, all of a sudden what happens to your code base is you get like repos that are described by your product, defined and sound kind of like your product features. And if instead you have a bunch of functional teams that are like back-end focused and web focused, then all of a sudden your code base ends up looking like that. And I think these aren't necessarily the right paradigms to actually architect a system. Sometimes it's a different architecture than your communication structure altogether. The next one, a CTO I know once said this. He said, complexity seems to move to the places with the least oversight. And so as you're like splitting things out into microservices, you may notice there's a repo that's just on a dumpster fire, and it's just a dumping ground for everything. You guys might have one of these at your company. Maybe it's your common repo or your Graph QL repo at some companies. And another one of my friends mentioned why Debian is awesome. He was a big Debian fan. And he said Debian's biggest value add was because you know when you install a package on Debian, it will work with all the other packages. NPM, I love NPM. Sometimes the packages on it are a nightmare to make work together. And so what I aimed to do here was try to make it so that you can install a single system and get all the packages that will actually work well together. And the last thing, I guess my conclusion is I want to reduce the number of black boxes in my code base when someone's developing in it, and I want to create more gray boxes. Not, there's this thing over there, I need to go dig for it, I need to figure out where it is. I'm a front-end developer, I'm never going to touch the back-end. I'm a back-end developer, fuck the front-end. Like, no, that's not how you work at a company. That's fucking messed up. I want to create more gray boxes and less black boxes. So maybe you guys will join me and help me out to make this thing awesome. Thanks.
Who's got questions? Bueller? No one? Oh.
Yeah. Have you, I'm assuming that your work is aware of your project?
Yeah.
Is there talks of you kind of putting it into your production website? How would that migration look?
I've avoided all talk of that. I've talked about, so I don't think uprooting an entire code base is necessarily the right call at a company that has like 30 or 40 people already there, and where you already have like a bunch of microservices and like a bunch of setup. It doesn't quite make sense. But what I do kind of talk about is, hey, can we make it so that if you want to go from one code base to another, we should make that easy, and we should make the path for people to expand their horizons as a developer really easy. And so I kind of focus on that.
Hi. That's really cool, by the way. Really impressed. But what do you think about that whole conflict between like growing teams that are distributed over geographical boundaries, different skill sets, and monolithic systems, right? So one of the things that SOA and distributed systems, and that whole quote, which I think is really cool, I'd never heard that before, about communication structures and how that informs design decisions, being actually useful to growing a team quickly.
Yeah, ultimately, I would imagine that this stops becoming useful at some point. This is not a mechanism to say you should never go to a more distributed model. It's a mechanism to say, well, the nice thing about kind of starting off in this way is you can actually find product market fit at your company much faster. And so this is aimed at helping go from there to maybe, I don't know, I'm going to throw out a number, like 50,000 requests per second. I don't know, like something like that. Once you hit a certain level of scale, you're ultimately going to have like all sorts of crazy problems that this is not going to solve for you. So I'm not even trying to solve those problems. In terms of, is it helpful that you get those boundaries? Certainly. But I also think they're limiting. And all of a sudden, you can't, all of a sudden, certain developers, I know myself, if I'm boxed into the web corner, I feel kind of trapped. And I'm like, I just want to go mess with this microservice over here. Like, let me go do that, you know? And no one's stopping you, but the boxes you're placed in kind of just unintentionally do.
Hi. So it's something related to what you were saying about Debian, that everything works well together, and then you wanted to create this project to kind of support that idea. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what is the extensibility of the project? Like, can users actually select something different and like, you've chosen packages yourself, but like, what can be changed if I don't want to use Material UI or something like that,
Yeah. So actually, Material doesn't come with it.
Oh, okay.
I like Material, so I was like, I'm going to show a demo with Material. Actually, the thing you get with it up front is like a really simple styling with Sass. If you want to replace that, we actually let you modify the Webpack and Babel configs. So we pass you all of our config, and we let you edit it. If you want to use other libraries, it might be a little more difficult, but if you want to submit a pull request for more customization, I'm really into that. So one philosophy I really like that I heard some other open source library use recently was batteries included but removable. And so I'd like to get that to happen here.
Okay. Another also question. I was kind of curious on whether or not the JSON Web Tokens were something that you're actively pushing with the project, or if that's just something for this demo tonight.
What was the first part?
For JWT, like, if you're trying to push that as part of like the framework that you created, or if that's just something for the demo and like somebody can use whatever they want.
JWT is, I think we're that one is kind of stuck in there. It would be a little bit more difficult to replace that piece because it's actually part of another library that uses that. So PostGraphile under the hood kind of relies on JWTs. And so that might be a little bit harder to replace, but maybe. I'm not opposed to it.
One more question. Okay, thank you very much, Parris.
Thanks.